I'm going to make a start. I've got a lot of slides to get through. They will be available after the conference, so don't worry too much about taking loads of notes. I'm going to go through quite a lot of material. So the title of this presentation is If Only You Knew Why Your Customers Do What They Do. So my expertise is behavioural analytics. It's really getting into what motivates people to do things, and I'm going to share with you some of the models and techniques that I've developed. So we'll do a quick introduction, really quick. Then I'll talk about the science of experience. How do we experience, and what is the nature of experience? What motivates people, what really motivates them, rather than what we think motivates them. The future of customer experience, because that's at an inflection point right now with people agonizing over, well, what is the next step? What's the next wave of customer experience? And then I'll do a quick summary and a call to action. So firstly, me. I love talking about me. I am a scientist. I'm an applied scientist, very heavily into data. So I was really all about the quant. But when I started getting into behaviour and customer experience and employee experience, and now more latterly business partners in the business-to-business world, you quickly realise that the quant-based sciences don't explain everything. So we know about the who, what, where, when, how much, how frequently, but the why was always quite difficult. And it took me a while to crack it, but I did. Not 100% perfectly. And if you're thinking about behaviour, forget being accurate. I've been married nearly 39 years. I still get it wrong with my wife almost every day. And she's been the subject of a long-running experiment in my view. So what I do is I help businesses really get to understanding why do people do what they do and give them the capability to do it rather than do it for them. And then what do you do after that? But before we begin, I'd like you just to spend a couple of seconds and think, how are you feeling right now? So just take a moment, reflect on it. How are you feeling right now? Okay. How many of you have thought of a sensation, like I'm hot, or I'm tired, or my bum is aching? Hands up. I'm not going to ask anybody to share anything more than that, okay? How many of you thought of an emotion, like bored? Yeah, a little bit of anticipation, okay? Asking you how you're feeling is the worst way of finding out how you're feeling. And I'll explain why in a moment. Most of us can't actually access the part of our brain that deals with that. And yet, it's fundamental to how we evaluate experiences. So in the science of experience, here's the first thing you have to be aware of. Many organizations obsess about what they do to deliver an experience as if that's the measure of the experience. It's not. What we experience is not what happens to us, it's how we interpret what happens to us. And we do that through filters and lenses and experience and a whole load of preconditions. And I was trying to get to the interpretation piece. So what's building that interpretation? What's building the way that we look at experiences? And an important part of that was this world of feelings, and for feelings I'm going to substitute emotions. So attitudes and beliefs are definitely there, but they tend to be more long-standing, but emotions are slightly more mercurial. They change more quickly and in a different way. Now you'll find lots of very worthy quotes about the influence of feelings and emotions, and Maya Angelou's got this one, people won't remember what you did, they'll remember how you made them feel, but it's backed up by the neuroscience. The neuroscience shows that in the vast majority of cases, our decisions are made instantly, emotionally, and we rationalize them afterwards. So we make a very quick snap decision and then we come up with the logical reasons why. So all decisions contain some emotion. That doesn't mean to say that all decisions are all emotion. And there are a lot of people going around at the moment talking about bringing empathy into business, how we need to emotionally connect with our customers or with our employees. I'm not particularly disagreeing with that, but there's an appropriate level for this. And one of the inappropriate forms of empathy I've seen is when your customers and your employees commiserate about how awful you are as an organization. So, you know, the customers say, I love your people are great, but you're horrible. I hate your business. And if you've ever seen the Fast Show sketch, you know, the computer says no, that's a great manifestation of what that looks like. So, all decisions contain some element of emotion. And why should we care? What is it about the customer experience that is important? Well, this is part of the inflection, which I'll come to in a moment. But when you do it right, when you get customer experience working well and is in an optimal environment for your business, you can measurably improve sales. You can measurably reduce costs. You can measurably increase advocacy. And you can even prevent churn. All of these in a quantifiable term. And I've got the evidence for these. I looked at millions of customer records and millions of customer data points, and I could show the relationship between what was driving customer experience, I'll come to that in a moment, and its impact on the business. So my primary audience is I was trying to convince the CFO that customer experience is a good thing. Because I started out 4 years ago with my arms crossed thinking, what's all this pink and fluffy feeling stuff? I'm a data scientist. I want quant-based data, things I can actually measure. The reason we're at this crossroads, and it's partly based upon some of the predictions Forrester are saying. Forrester are currently saying that 25% of CX professionals will lose their job this year. I've already started to see that happen. But there will be a rise in CX executives. And one of the things that will separate those two groups is the executives are used to talking about business cases backed with money and numbers. So they can talk about the things that the business or the organization actually cares about. Most organizations would be perfectly happy to not talk to a customer ever. And Ryanair had a very good business model about we don't care about customer experience, it's all about a cost-benefit ratio. What they do care about is money. Even charities care about money. So in order to prove an ROI, you have to know what does it cost to deliver something that our customers genuinely value. So you need to know what really matters to customers, not what they say matters, because often that's gained, or they're not really sure. And I would strongly advocate, if you want to make a business case for CX or employee experience or partner experience, pick a business KPI as your outcome goal, not one of the traditional measures of customer experience. I'll explain why for that in a moment, and why so many businesses are getting it wrong. So I've got a vision of how to do it. There is a model, and I've got a blog article you can look up if you want to do that. So we're at this crossroads. We have to prove the ROI of the things that we do for customer experience, that it is having a business impact. The problem with the way that we've been looking at drivers of things like satisfaction is twofold. Firstly, things like Net Promoter Score or customer SAT, CSAT scores are correlated, not causative. So the correlation goes along the lines of the higher our NPS score, the better businesses tend to do. And there's a good correlation between that, but it's not perfect. But then we get to the point and say, well, we need to know what's driving that. So we look at the drivers of the satisfaction score. But what the business wants to know is what's driving the business. And the satisfaction score is a byproduct of doing that. So there's causation from the drivers to the business outcomes, but a correlation between satisfaction and outcomes. And at the personal level, the evidence clearly shows that even people who give you high satisfaction scores are not necessarily loyal. They'll turn around and defect the very following day. And Fred Reichelt, when he wrote the book on Net Promoter Score, saw that in his own data. 60 to 80% of defectors would say that they were still satisfied or very satisfied with their current provider when they switched, which tells you there's something weird about using Net Promoter to predict what customers do. The other reason that it's a challenge is that the traditional measures of CX is a losing proposition. So I'm going to talk about absolute terms here. The cost to deliver is on the bottom axis, and the customer satisfaction rate is on the y-axis. And this is a typical curve. So to go from dreadful to bad is actually quite easy. It doesn't take a lot of effort, just stop doing awful things. To go from bad to good takes a bit more effort, and to go from good to excellent takes more effort still. So in absolute terms, it gets harder and more expensive to deliver improvements in satisfaction. So when you have a CEO that commits to the market that they're going to raise satisfaction by 5 points in the following year, you better hope that you're way down at the bottom and you're a really awful organisation. Because the only way you could do that is to actually spend a lot of money, and if you're very good, it will be a deep pocket exercise. But often a better exercise is to stabilise your customer experience, carry on meeting what your customers expect, but do it at less cost. And some of the technologies we'll be talking about later about digital transformation is one way you can partly do that. You don't have to use it to try and improve the customer experience, because often your customers don't actually value that very much. You say, you're okay. You know, I don't expect a relationship with my supermarket. I want to go in, get my stuff, get out. It's purely transactional. I don't want a greeter. You know, I just want to go in. In fact, ignore me is better. But if you can do this, you can make savings that will fund sometimes the more complex and difficult transformation program. So if people start breaking out flow diagrams about your business processes, and they want to break it all and rebuild it and get rid of all of the effort, that's actually very hard to do. Whereas sometimes automation and digital is easier to do. It doesn't necessarily improve things, but it can make it quicker. The other thing is we're often acting blind. We don't know where all the data is coming from, and these are sometimes called the voices. So I'm going to give you two models. The first of which is the ideal value creation chain. So we start on the right-hand side and say, well, what kind of business do we want to be? What's our purpose? And that will then dictate what kind of experiences do we want to deliver that the customers will go through, and that will be via channels and through our employees, which dictates the journey, and then we'll have the process that reflects the journey, and our technology will underpin that. And we can gather data at every stage. So all of these voices, all of these steps can produce insight that we could act. That's the ideal. The practical and typical version looks more like this. We've invested a lot in technology which dictates that it needs certain things to happen, so the process has to look a particular way. The process then dictates the journey, which has to be delivered by the employee through the channel to the customer, who at this point is now in a pretty locked-in process. It's all defined for them, so their experience will reflect that, and that will come through for the business results. And we typically only measure here. We measure the customer and the experience, and yet the business results could reflect a failure at any point in this value creation chain. It can go all the way back to your technology. You're asking a dumb question because somebody wrote a gate into software 15 years ago that's been too hard for us to get rid of. And yet it serves no purpose that has value for our customers. And this is typically the way that we operate. The other thing is that we don't think very sensibly about our data. So if you want to do customer experience, you need customer data to get insights. Typically, every organization invests in operational analytics, what happened, a little bit of diagnostic analytics perhaps, well, why did it happen? And then we can do a bit of planning, forecasting. So in contact centers, for example, that might be workforce management, demand management. It gets more interesting when you start to go into predictive analytics. Well, what will happen if something changes, like we introduce COVID-19? What will that do to our sales figures? And then you get optimization in silico simulation, where we look at all of the different scenarios and we pick the one that best meets our goals. So it's sometimes called goal constraint modeling, and that should feed the purpose of our prescriptive models, the AI and the machine learning, which says in given circumstances where we have these models, this is the action we recommend you would take. And this is typically where bots fit. Now, this pyramid, every layer builds on the layer before. However, most organizations are in the bottom half with point solutions further up. So they might have an AI or a bot doing a particular job within their organization, but they're not generalized, they're not widespread. You do not drop a lower level just to move to the one before. Everything adds value, and it builds on the layer before. So in order to actually take action, which is based on insight, you will need to have data and analytics. You also need to understand what motivates people, why they do what they do. So this is a quote from J.P. Morgan, the industrialist. A man always has two reasons for doing anything. There's the good reason, and that's the one we tell everybody else. That's the logical reason, and the real reason. Why you really do something, that's usually very internalized. So I came up with a model. This is what I had to do this. So I'll share this with you. If you want to predict a decision that somebody's going to make, this is what I need to think about. Firstly, there's a continuum between rational needs and our emotional wants. Now, needs are bounded. If I'm hungry and I eat, the need disappears. Wants are unbounded. No matter how happy I am, I think I could be a bit happier. They're infinite, they can extend. So, and everybody is somewhere in this, every decision is somewhere in a spectrum between that rationality and emotion. If you buy a Ferrari, I love Ferrari, I'm never going to be able to afford one, but rational affordability constraint overrides my emotional connectivity to the brand. But if I was a Premier League footballer, or maybe I was playing for the Royals, and I wanted a Ferrari, I'd go and get one and give a hang for the fuel economy and what it does to the planet. Okay, so that's a purely emotional decision. We also have our internal biases. Cognitive biases, where our faulty brain thinks that we're smart and we're not. And if you've ever left the house and come back with two of something you never intended to buy one of, welcome to the world of cognitive biases. There are about 152 known ways that our logic fails us. And external influence. When we're lazy and we rely on other people to make decisions, we go with a 5-star rating. It's why ratings are so important, because we follow the herd. But you also need to understand the context of the stimulus. What is it I'm trying to achieve right now? And most importantly, how did I get to this point? The history and where habit comes from. If you can represent those, and I can with 12 integer numbers, you get a position of where somebody's mindset is that then influences their next decision. So this is the basic model. It can be represented, you can teach it to a machine. You need to understand that what people care about. For that, you need natural language modeling. And expectation also has a big role. So we have the budget and the premium experience, and that's good. And then we have the pleasantly surprised. Let's delight all our customers. Please don't. It doesn't pay. And I've got the data to show you that it doesn't. But occasionally we disappoint them. Your best bet as a business is to be in the zone of trust. The zone of trust says it doesn't matter what the expectation is, but if you consistently deliver against that expectation, people then think you're consistent and predictable. And if you're predictable, I know what you're going to do, I can trust you to do it when I want you to. So the zone of trust, the advice I give is most of your customer interactions should fall within the zone of trust, irrespective of what the level of expectation might be. So if you've ever done target shooting, the thing they teach first is grouping. Get your grouping right, and then we'll work on the aim. So this is the same thing. Become consistent, because my data shows customers predict that even more than being pleasantly surprised from time to time, because it means that you are predictable. So the future of CX. It's going to be difficult. It's not going away. It will still be a big business priority. I'm just going to go through this because you can read them afterwards. There's a couple that I would like you to think about, though. CX and the CMO's role are going to combine. So marketing and CX are going to become one thing. Secondly, it has to think the whole value chain. You simply cannot think about a journey or an interaction being the whole of the customer experience. So what can you do? Well, remember that the customer experience is defined by the customer, not you, that it can deliver business outcomes. And if you can't write a numeric business case on this, come and have a word with me, I'll give you some pointers, or go onto the website and I'll show you. Look at the focus and the drivers of the business outcome you want, not the measures. The term for being focused on the measure is called surrogation, where the measure is more important than the thing it measures. And being better is not always about having higher satisfaction scores. It may be about being consistent. Human decision making does have multiple dimensions, and they can be measured. New tools allow us to do that, and anticipated. And you need to know what really matters to people before you can deliver it. So the next steps. Firstly, ask yourself, are you ready? Benchmark, please benchmark your current CX. So many people say we need to be better and they have no idea where they are. Have a clear vision of where you want to get to. And if you want to look at the program, I've got a 3-month program. You could get it from my blog. Explains how to do that with all the key points. But I'll leave you with one thing. If you want to know how people really feel, if I wanted to know what you were feeling at this point, I wouldn't ask you how you're feeling. I would ask you, how will you describe this to your colleagues when you're back in the office tomorrow? Because when you tell that little story, you will leak emotional indicators into your language. It's human nature. And we can detect that, and we can act on that. And at that point, I will leave my email address up there. If anybody wants some of these slides, then please contact me, join me on LinkedIn, and say, are there any questions? We might have time for just one very quick question.
We have one very quick question, Tom, a quick answer. No questions? Oh, yes, two questions.
Yeah, so the question was, is NPS good at measuring customer satisfaction and everywhere? The golden question, it's always asked. The Net Promoter Score has had its day. The Net Promoter System, which is actually looking at what's driving that, still has plenty of runway left in it. The problem with the NPS score is actually the most widely cited case of surrogation, where people get hung up on the number and moving the needle rather than what it represents. And they take a superficial view about what's driving the needle rather than what's driving the dollars or the pounds.